The school shooting in Florida has resulted in calls for prayer as well as gun control. Pastors and rabbis are working on their sermons today. Reverend Dr. Scott Stearman of the Metro Baptist Church in New York City is here with a preview of his message. That's what they're going to be preparing for largely this weekend. What will you be telling people?
Yesterday on social media, I put a message out that was based on a passage we actually read on Ash Wednesday that just came up in our sort of typical readings from the Hebrew Scriptures, or the Old Testament as Christians call it, from the prophetic book of Isaiah. And in chapter 58, Isaiah has this wonderful, beautiful passage where he talks about the fasting that God does not require, which is sadness and sackcloth and ashes. But what God does require is feeding the poor, lifting up those who are downtrodden. He has this beautiful passage about helping those who are in need. And he has a clear contrast between those who see prayer and fasting as just a show and those who actually let their prayers lead to absolute action.
That's interesting because, we hear from the politicians, our thoughts and prayers go out with the victims, and then there's no follow-through action. And that's a really interesting statement that the two are very much connected. Does one not have much value without the other?
Well, in this passage, the word is even detestable to God. I think not only does it not have any value, I think it's even worse than that. I think it's hypocritical, and I think it's often used as a power play or as just a way of passing off responsibility, which many of us now in this sort of movement, if you will, wanting to address this issue, are a bit allergic to the thoughts and prayers phrase because it's so.
There's a religious divide here on gun control.
Yes.
The evangelists, the Southern Baptists, seem to be more of the quote gun rights organization. How does religion see that? Why does that divide happen?
I think it's a great question. I'm not sure I have a very good answer for it. I do think there's, of course, a rural city a reality that's at play here, and I grew up in a very rural setting, Oklahoma. I hunted when I was young, and so I understand that notion of having a gun and enjoying it recreationally. I see no problem with that, and so I know there's an element there that's at work, but frankly, I just don't understand the rationality of anyone owning an assault weapon for any reason.
So when parishioners ask you what they can do, especially this far away from, there's a lot of distance involved, and maybe it's not as close as they can help. What would you suggest to them that they could help?
We talk about our responsibility to vote, to be politically engaged. We try not to make the division I think some religious bodies have made between your spiritual life and your voting life, and so that's one obvious way. My colleague up at Riverside Church, friend and colleague Amy Butler, did a God and Guns conference for the church a number of months ago. It's been a year or two now, actually. And I think there is a movement among progressive Christians to really get their congregants out and engage in this issue in a number of ways.
And religion has historically played a very big role in mobilizing people. There's no question about that.
Civil rights being a prime example.
Civil rights, because you have the attention of a large group of people.
Right.
But the flock possibly isn't all of one mind.
Not at all. That's very true.
And so it's a little bit more difficult. So is gun control an issue that you've addressed before?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, in America, how could you not? In America, this is hardly, the tragedy in Florida is just unspeakable, but yet it follows how many?
How many?
You lose touch.
The shooting happened, of course, on Ash Wednesday, one of the holiest days for, I guess, Catholics and Christians.
And Christians in general.
Was there any message in that, do you think?
Well, the message of Ash Wednesday is that we are all from dust, and to dust we shall return. So there is that, of course, message of mortality. And
it kicks off Lent.
It kicks off Lent, and of course, the idea of getting in touch with the mortality is because it helps, if you know your destination, one starts a different kind of journey. And so knowing you have a limited number of breaths to breathe, you have a responsibility to use your energies in life for some purpose. And
I've heard some conservatives say that part of the problem here with the violence in schools is that we've, quote, taken God out of the classroom, and I'm sure you've heard that over and over again. What role does religion, if any, play in a public school?
In a public school, sectarianism should play no role whatsoever. Religion writ large is a part of the human history, human condition, if you will, and so it should be studied, possibly academically. Should be looked at from a variety of different ways. I think that's no problem. But in terms of sectarian activities, they don't belong in public school in this country.
Can you teach or even discuss good and evil without bringing religion into that conversation?
Yes, I think you can. I think it's possible to discuss what is good and what is bad, or what is evil even. The notion of evil, of course, is a little more complicated, but certainly you can discuss morality apart from religion.
Scott, I'm sure that you've given too many of these sermons this weekend. Do you know what you're going to say by now?
Well, I know what we're going to do in the service. I know we're going to give some time and space to remember those whose lives have lost. And then I know we're going to spend some time, again, reflecting on what our responsibility is in light of our prayers for those people. So that sort of two-pronged approach is going to be one that we will take on Sunday. To be completely honest, but no, my manuscript is not done, my sermon is not completed, but those will be the core components. This Sunday we'll be reading from the Mark text where Jesus is baptized and begins his ministry and is identified as a child of God. So our identification as children of God and responsibility comes out of that identification to be agents of change in a broken world. So there you go.
Reverend Scott Stearman with the Metro Baptist Church here in New York City. Thank you for spending some time with us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.